Hey, my friends, it's Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. And I know that from time to time, I tell you a story more than once. And sometimes that is on accident because, I don't know, we talk a lot. And sometimes different angles on the same story are useful for making different points or getting to know each other in different ways. And I just ask for your grace on being a gentleman who occasionally retells a story. However, other times I retell a story because I totally meant to. And this is one of those times, but it's also one of my favorite things that ever happened. We were in Sturgis with some friends one time. That's where the big motorcycle rally happens here in the Black Hills. But this is in the off season. There's nobody in there. We go to this restaurant. It's called the Loud American. They got stickers and everything on the door. It's like no gang colors, no firearms, bats, chains, knives. It's like they're trying to prevent the anchor fight from Anchorman. And so you go in there, and it's a relatively normal restaurant once you're in there, but it has a great big stage. And I'm in there on a Saturday one time with my family and my friend's family, and we're it. There's just nobody in there. There's wait staff kind of doing nothing, and there's an old guy at a table by himself. And so it's real quiet, and it's real nice. Well, the old guy walks up on stage, gets out this super old guitar, and I'm like, what are we doing, old guy? And he starts playing this song. And I expected it to be Black Hills local serviceable, but it was delightful. It was fantastic. It had such a touch. It was so natural. It was so easy. And it was such a beautiful little love song. And I went from, oh, great, now I have to pretend to be interested because someone is weirdly doing music, to enchanted. Couldn't take my eyes off of this dude playing this song. And then he just wrapped it up. He didn't even finish the whole song. I was like, well, what the heck was that? And he just goes and sits down, and nobody clapped. And I was like, well, I'll clap. That was amazing. And nobody went and talked to him or anything. He's just sitting over there in the corner by himself. I'm like, you poor man. So I go over there, right? And I'm like, hey, that was really good, dude. Have you been playing for a long time? He's like, well, yes, I have. Wow, okay. Well, that was awesome. Is this somebody else's song? I haven't heard that before. Did you write that? Oh, no, I wrote that one. Well, it was beautiful. You're really good at this. I think you should keep doing it. Well, I think I will. And we just had this nice back and forth where I really wanted the man to feel encouraged, and felt super bad that nobody was excited about or appreciating what he'd just done. And so I gave him a bunch of compliments and encouragement, and reached out my hand and said, well, my name's Matt Whitman. It's nice to meet you. And he's like, well, my name's Doug Stone. And I was like, oh, like you're the famous country musician Doug Stone, aren't you? He's like, yes, sir, I am. Okay, yeah, you got all like the #1 hits and everything. Yeah, yes, sir, that's me. Okay, I'm an idiot. And he laughed, and he was super, super nice about the whole thing. He's like, no, I'm playing a show tonight. Love to have you come. He said, you look like a rock and roll guy, but I'd still make it fun for you. And the funny thing was, I think we had tickets to Foreigner or maybe Diamond Rio up in Deadwood that night. So we didn't come down and hear Doug Stone on his personal invitation, which was just stupid. But here's the thing. That is a nice story about a time where someone appreciated what somebody else was, but really underestimated them, and so responded to them improperly. I mean, at least I erred on the side of nice, right? But in Matthew 27, we're getting a scenario where people don't understand who they're in the presence of, and they're responding improperly in a negative way. Because the Bible is describing a Jesus of Nazareth who is God in the flesh. And we're talking about God in the flesh here, not like a local deity who is descended from Hercules or something like that, and like the kind of legends that everybody had around the ancient Near East and the Mediterranean world. No. We're talking about God in the flesh like the I am God, the one whose name is essence and being, the one who is by definition infinite, but also transcends the concept of infinite because nothing binds him. He's more powerful and more everything than everything. This is the being who made the first volitional decision ever, the decision that actually exists outside of normal time frame decision making. It was the decision for there to be something instead of nothing. Colossians 1, which is a letter that the Apostle Paul writes a little bit later in the New Testament that hopefully someday we'll work through together. Chapter 1 there describes him as being fully participatory in creation and the sustainer of all things, and that Jesus himself is stunningly unlimited in power. We're not talking about some cheap exaggeration of a person who's got foibles and gets bent out of shape about things and gets vindictive and silly, like Thor, whose biggest point of emphasis seems to be that he's very laddish and knows how to play along with the boys. No, we're not talking about that. We're talking about a God who doesn't need anything. We're talking about a God who is beyond everything. We're talking about a God who goes beyond the limits of human reason out into the realm of the very existence of all things. Total transcendence. Also, Carl, Donnie, and Steve showed up that day to work and were like, who we executing today? Oh, okay. Well, we normally like to make fun of him. Should we make fun of him? We should. I got some things I want to say to him. And they punch him and beat him and make fun of him. And they have no idea who it is that they're punching, that they're flogging, that they're mocking. And that is a very important element in the story of this abandonment, this suffering, this thing that Jesus is doing. Matthew 27:27. Then the governor's soldiers took Jesus into the praetorium and gathered the whole company of soldiers around him. That word praetorium is a little bit tricky. I guess it's just derived from praetor. I don't know. I haven't looked that up. I've always just assumed. Praetor was a role that meant different things depending on when you're talking about in the Roman Republic and then into the Roman Empire. At times, this is a term that is effectively synonymous with a local governor, but I kind of think at this point in history, it was not entirely synonymous, but became more synonymous shortly after these events, but maybe when Matthew was writing. So it's a little bit tricky here. This might be one of those locations where even the few years that elapsed between when the Bible events happened and when it was written down, that the name of a location changed. It looks like Matthew went with something that would be reflective of a slightly later role of the praetor or the government. But whatever the case is, one of two places. This is either a little bit away from the temple in another center of power in Jerusalem, or we're talking about something that is adjacent to the temple itself, the fortress Antonia, which I believe held a barracks as well. I think we're looking at about 600 soldiers who would have been present and in and around the temple complex at that time. So I want to acknowledge that there's an interesting translation dilemma there with the word praetorium. And I also want to acknowledge that we're not 100% sure exactly where these events occurred, because we could be referring to one of two possible buildings, depending on whether the gospel authors went with what they were called at the time the events happened or what they were called at the time that they wrote it down. That's not really the point, but we get into all of them side points, don't we? So we got this whole company, 600 soldiers around him. So he's surrounded. He's going nowhere. I've never been staked out by 600 soldiers, and it sounds like just a normal Tuesday when you're reading through the Bible. Oh, there are a bunch of soldiers, old Romans. Oh, they're all dead now anyway. Who cares? Well, actually, this is a pretty big deal. It demonstrates that Jesus has risen to the level of getting the attention of the big dogs of the world, and they're not impressed and they don't like him, and he's about ready to be ground up by the Roman execution machine. They stripped him and put a scarlet robe on him. So apparently it's not going to be enough for these Romans, who theoretically have no dog in this fight anyway, to just execute Jesus and be like, whatever. Pilate's attitude on this is wash our hands of it. Let's just get it done. Finish him off. No. They take their jobs very seriously. And part of the job of crucifixion is to exalt on high someone who would hold themselves out as king. Oh, really? You like being exalted on high, do you? Oh, really? You think you should be the one in charge and the government you have isn't getting it done. You think you should be the one raised up in front of people. Okie dokie. Well, we'll give you exactly what you wanted, just in a twisted version of it. Crucifixion is meant to make that kind of point as well. It's part of the slap in the face and the retribution for the insurrection usually associated with the punishment at hand. So no, they're going all in on this guy. They don't really know who he is or what the deal is, but they heard something about him imagining that he's king of the Jews. They're going to put a scarlet robe right on him. Again, maybe an unnecessary side note, but I think kind of an interesting one. Red was a symbol of royalty for a lot of different people groups in the ancient world, and it was increasingly becoming a symbol of royalty in the Roman Empire. But in the Roman Republic, purple was the outfit that really communicated that kind of royalty. And even at this point, emperors like Tiberius would still have worn purple. It's like it was almost too big a stretch, even in mockery, to dress somebody else up in purple. And also, purple was just ludicrously expensive. The colors did not all cost the same back then. Purple was made from a crushed seashell that was native to up a little bit north, around where Matthew met the Canaanite woman in chapter 15 on that voyage. He was up around Tyre, and the ancient city of Tyre of the Phoenicians has this one particular type of mollusk that can be ground up and processed to create this purple. But purple is a very expensive color to make. And so either out of economic concerns or not wanting to create a direct rivalry with the emperor, even in jest, he gets red instead of purple. And as is the case from time to time, it's becoming obvious to me we're going to need a couple of days to break down all of this mockery phase of the trip toward the cross. But the point stands. What we're seeing here is that in the same way I completely misreckoned country music legend Doug Stone, but at least did it in a nice way, so these executioners, these soldiers, have completely misreckoned Jesus. They think they're dealing with some guy, some clown with a joke claim to royalty, when in fact, he's the guy with the ultimate claim to royalty. He is the establisher of the great kingdom, the kingdom that was promised, the kingdom that was in the mind of God and planned from before time as we understand time even was initiated. This is the maker and sustainer of all things, and they're cracking cheap jokes and throwing lame clothes from the costume closet on him to try to make a mockery of him. The reality is that even in this, though, he cannot be mocked. This looks like losing, but this is winning. More on this tomorrow. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. Let's do this again soon.